Hey everybody, welcome to the Par Success family here. I'm excited to kind of do this month's, it's October's, so this month's member community educational. We're going to talk about the science of swing speed today. This is a big hot topic in the world of golf performance. So kind of wanted to dive and dig through a lot of the actual science that's out there. There's a lot of pseudoscience that's going around, so just wanted to kind of clarify basically what are the elements of swing speed, and then kind of how to actually, make it better for yourself, and how to know when to use certain elements of it. So let's dive into it. So we have, the first question I always like to ask is kind of get you to start to think about what actually creates distance off the tee. There's lots of different elements to it. They're not all in the technical world or the physical world. They kind of are all over. So, in the physical world, there's mobility, strength, ball speed. In the technical world, there's your attack angle, your, basically you can start talking lots of other different things that you can do to adjust and affect ball speed, launch angle, descent angle of descent, those sorts of things. Obviously, equipment plays a big role in this in terms of what ball you're using, the shafts that you're using. So there's lots of different elements that contribute to what actually is creating distance. So we'll cover all of those today. So I think the big takeaway from this slide is that there's not just one thing that impacts distance. There's lots of different elements, and kind of what our goal here at Par for Success and our goal for all golfers is that we can start to demystify what you need to be working on, because it's different for everybody. Buying a new club is maybe extremely appropriate for one golfer, it may be the worst idea for another. So hopefully as we go through today, we'll kind of have a very clear picture of how to understand what you need to address based on where you are right now. So how fast is fast enough? And everyone says they want to increase swing speed. I think what's been challenging for a lot of golfers is they don't necessarily know how fast is good for their age. So this is an older slide I pulled from one of our earlier research. Our research at this point is up over 1,000 data points, and we're broken down into smaller age groups. But this at least just gives you a general idea in terms of 50th percentile would be considered average. So, for instance, the average 50 to 60-year-old male is going to swing about 98 miles an hour. As that changes, basically, as you age higher and lower, then it basically, obviously the averages will change. So you can see when you're younger, it continually goes up from 10 until 29. That's more of our pros. And then once you get into the 30 to 50, 50 to 60, obviously it starts to go down as people age. So 90th percentile, just to be clear, that means that the people in the 90th plus percentile are better than 9 out of 10 other golfers their age. So the average would be the 50th percentile. So what goes into that in terms of how can you swing faster after you kind of assess where you're at on that spectrum? There's four basic elements I like to use, I call them kind of the four quadrants. One is going to be the equipment that you're using. If that is not optimized, that would be an area that you could look at addressing to improve how fast you're swinging. Second would be the technical element. If you have the ability to improve technique, that could be an area where you can actually improve there. The third is going to be mobility. So that's going to be basically if you are tight, that would be an area that you can improve to improve your mobility. And then the fourth area is going to be physical power. So that is going to be basically looking at how strong you are, how fast you're moving. So obviously two of those quadrants are physical in nature, and the other two are not necessarily physical. Those are going to be more on the technical or equipment side of things. So we're going to kind of dig into each of those a little bit as we go. But so when you're thinking about where can I improve my club head speed, you want to think there's four potential areas that you can look at. One would be, is your equipment fit? Two would be technique. Three would be, how's your mobility? And four would be, how's your overall ability to produce power? So let's kind of dig into each of those. So for equipment, I have a little simple little chart here. One of the ways that equipment can be important is making sure that you actually have the right length shaft. But there's lots of other things when you go to get a club fitting that you want to can affect the quality of of your accuracy, of how fast the ball is moving, how far it's traveling. So obviously shaft length and stiffness can play a big role. Everybody talks about, oh, I have a stiff shaft because I swing X amount of miles an hour. I think it's important to understand that stiff shaft is not a standardized term. So every company determines what they call stiff and what they call regular. Is not standardized at all across the industry. So if you, what I would say is there's what's called the frequency. It's basically a little machine. They put the shaft in, they kind of ding it, and they see how many times it vibrates. And so basically that's how you can standardize how stiff a shaft actually is. So don't just necessarily go grab the stiff shaft or the regular shaft or the senior shaft. Actually ask your club fitter to truly measure the stiffness of it, because all stiff shafts or all regular shafts, they're not created equal. They're very, very different. Obviously the head, grip size, the shaft has a huge impact in terms of center of face contact, ball speed. Ultimately, that all impacts all of that. So definitely want to kind of get with a good club fitter. If you are local here, there's a couple of good guys in this area. Just kind of come in and ask us, and we'll help to kind of direct you to where you should go, or where we'd recommend that you go. But that would definitely be one piece of the equation that I would definitely want to make sure that is taken care of. What I would say generally for juniors, we say kind of every 6 months you want to be kind of having your equipment checked as you're growing, as you're changing. For adults, for seniors, pay attention to the physical side that we're going to talk about a little bit here. As you experience changes in the physical side of things, that's where you probably will want to get your equipment checked, because as you're getting faster or getting more mobile, you may use that club a bit differently. And you want to make sure that just the equipment that you have is changing and keeping up with the changes that are happening with your body. So if a lot of changes are happening, go get it checked out. All right. So then we have the technical side of things. So this is going to be, there's a number of different things you can look at. You can look at kinematic sequencing. Lag is just an example that I pulled up. Technique-wise, you can see in the picture on the top right there. The guy on the left of that image obviously has early released his club, has lost that lag, whereas on the right side of that, where he's got the steeper angle, he's maintained more energy in that club. So that would be an example of a technical thing that can be addressed to improve club head speed. Ground force is, I put here kind of golden ticket. This is what you're going to start to hear a lot about in the upcoming next 5 years. There's a lot more research starting to be done here. We're actually in the process of trying to get one of these force plates. So they're expensive. So we're looking at kind of different ways to get them in our facility here. But I think what the cool stuff that you see here is you can actually measure how much force you're putting into the ground, and you're going to get that much back out, which then turns into club head speed. And there's an incredibly high correlation. So when we'll look a little later at the physical tests that correlate to swing speed. When you actually start looking at relative force of how much force people are putting in relative to their body weight, that's even higher in terms of related to club head speed. And that's what you can see here in this graph, where you see that kind of, basically the more force relative to the body weight. So some 1.0 would mean that they put the same amount of body weight, same amount of force on the ground is equal to their body weight. You can see that there's a very linear, relationship in terms of the more force you put into the ground, the faster the club is going to go. So that is actually a physical element as well too. So in terms of, the stronger you get in terms of squatting or hinging, that's going to allow you to put more force on the ground, which inherently then allows you to swing the club faster. But you can improve ground force through technical instruction too. And then I think the other ones, it's how much torque and how long are the lever arms you're creating. If you're letting your elbows bend on the way back, and not keeping them straight, that shortens the lever arm. So those are sort of technical things that you're talking with your swing coach. If you want to get more into those, we're happy to kind of talk top level with you on those, and then kind of obviously refer you over to if you have a swing coach, have a conversation with them. If you don't have a swing coach, we obviously can recommend people that we would say kind of are the top instructors that would get all of this and be able to kind of help you, kind of guide you through your journey to increase that club head speed. All right, so those are the first two areas that are outside of the physical kind of realm. we're going to spend a bit more time in the physical realm because that's obviously where we specialize. So going into that third quadrant is mobility. So you have 4 main rotary centers, your neck, your shoulders, your thoracic spine, and your hips. If you fail to rotate in those 4 areas, you don't have full range of motion in those 4. I kind of will say nothing else really matters, because that's going to be a block to you in terms of being able to get to where you want to go. So we'll just run quickly through these. If you guys were here last month, we did kind of the whole body swing connection. These are the same tests here, so same images. So first one is, can you touch your chin to both collarbones? Second one is the 90-90 test in golf posture. Can you get let's see if we can draw here. Let's see if I get this to work. So see this line here, it can be greater than your spine angle. Actually, let's make that a different color so you can actually see it. So this line coming down, so your forearm angle should get past your spine angle. So that would be considered a pass there. Let's turn that off. Third one's going to be thoracic rotation, so sitting in a chair, knees together. You don't necessarily need a club behind. You can just have your arms crossed on your shoulders. Can you rotate at least 45 degrees, absolute minimum? What we're actually seeing in our data is we're collecting kind of the averages for each age group in terms of how much people turn. Like, for instance, a junior golfer should be turning about 70 to 80 degrees. But then what we'll see with an adult, we're looking more like that 50 degree area. So adult meaning like 50 plus. So there is a difference, and there's a difference between guys and girls too. So, but this looks at your T-spine rotation, and then a hip rotation deficit. So we want to get beyond 45 degrees there. So if my right leg in that chair is at 0, and then you see my shin coming out to the side at it's actually beyond 45 degrees. That's kind of what we're looking to see is at least kind of 40 there. So if you're in-house here, we lay on the ground or the table, and we actually test you passively. That's a simple way to, as you're watching this right now, just test it in your, at your home or wherever, in your car, wherever you're watching this. So those are kind of the big 4 that you want to look at: neck, shoulders, T-spine, and hips. If you don't pass all 4 of those, then that is something that, obviously we can improve that. That's going to inherently improve your club head speed because you're going to be able to rotate more. The final, if you do create or do pass all of those, the dissociation deficit, so that's the ability to separate upper body and lower body. So if I come up standing, if I'm able to keep my hips still while I rotate my upper body, or keep my upper body still while I rotate my hips, that's helps in terms of creating separation. If we start talking about, as we get into the actual downswing and creating X factor, those sorts of things. So that'd be kind of the icing on the cake test to look at. So that covers the big 3. So we're going to spend a bit more time on this 4th quadrant just because there's a lot of confusion here, and I want to make sure it's very clear on what the research says, and so hopefully put it in terms that everyone understands. So obviously equipment, just to recap quickly: technique and mobility. Those I feel like are pretty simple, straightforward areas that you can improve. The 4th quadrant is power. I think the reason that this gets confusing is because we interchange speed and power and strength all over the place. But the actual math equation is power is the sum of how much force you can create and how fast you can move that force. So force, if you want to, is equivalent to strength, and speed is speed. So clubhead speed is a golf-specific power measure. So we look at, if you swing the club 100 miles an hour, that's a reflection of how much power you're delivering through the club. So that means is how strong are you, so the force that you're delivering through that shaft and clubhead, plus the speed at which you're delivering that. And that's where shaft and clubhead is a huge player in that, because depending how much force you're putting through, how much torque you're putting through that shaft, you want that shaft to respond to you optimally. So as you're improving your strength, and improving the amount of force you can create, those are the same, mean exact same thing, those 2 sentences. You want your shaft to adapt with that. So at this point, we've got over 1,000 data points to find the best way to maximize this equation. And we're going to get even better at it over the next 5 years. Really, as we continue to get more and more data, we can look more into the ground force research and that sort of thing. But hopefully that makes sense. If anything doesn't make sense, just stop me, put a comment in the chat box, and just say, hey, wait, what does that mean? But so simply, your club head speed is equal to how much force you can create and how fast you can create that force. That's going to directly impact how fast you swing the golf club. So this is where golf performance comes in. So it's a supplement to instruction. It's a supplement to the equipment element. It does not replace that. I think it's incredibly important that we're talking about a quadrant of speed here. This is not the speed equation. There's the 4 different quadrants. This is just one of those quadrants. If you're optimized in terms of how much you can physically do, that should make the technical and equipment side easier to get even better results. And basically, the only way you're going to figure out where you're at is through the testing that we'll talk about. This isn't mainstream golf fitness. So a lot of what you see on social media, Golf Channel, those places where that's golf, we kind of term golf fitness. There's no real testing involved in that. There's no integration of all the 4 quadrants and understanding how to do what and when you should do it. So this is a bit different. And then there is, obviously there's injury prevention and sport specific. It's kind of all rolled into one. If you're training with true golf performance, you're going to reduce your chances of injury. It's going to be very specific to your golf game. It's going to increase your club head speed, those sorts of things. You should have in a golf performance program mobility. There should be dynamic stability, strength, speed, power, and we should do it in all 3 planes. So, if you're working out here, everybody hates 3-way lunges, going to the side, going backwards, going forwards. Another example would be like the lateral sled pulls where you're going sideways. So training in multiple planes of motions or lateral step ups, those sorts of things. So in this image here, there's what I call it, just to differentiate, any of the images where you see somebody standing on something unstable, there's actually been a good amount of research that actually says that when you train on an unstable surface, it actually will decrease your ability to output power. So anybody standing on an unstable surface and saying that's going to improve your mobility or improve your stability, because if you can swing a golf club on an unstable surface, then it's going to be better in terms of you'll be more stable on the ground. And theoretically, that can kind of make sense and sound smart, but it's actually totally wrong based on actual research that's been done. So, excuse me. So any of these pictures where you see someone standing on a foam roll or balance disc and taking golf swings, just don't do that. It actually hurts your golf game. You see stuff, medicine ball throwing, you see the box jumps, those are looking at a lot of the speed elements. We're going to talk specifically where those fall in. You also see the picture of Rory doing a hex bar deadlift. You see the picture of the woman doing the snatch. Those are more on the strength side and the developing the true physical element of how much force you can create as well. So if we kind of break it into, what we're going to do is breaking it apart here. So we have power, remember, and there is force or strength plus speed. So we're going to talk about that force and strength piece first. So there's a couple of main elements, kind of 7 main elements that you definitely want to make sure in your strength training portion. And so, you guys probably all see this in your programs that you're doing. But you should have a squat and a hinge of the first 2. So if you look at the first image on the top there, the guy in the red shirt split with him in a white shirt, you can see the angle in terms of how the knees are kind of more forward underneath the toes on the left. That's a squat. And then on the right, where he's in the white shirt, where the shins are more vertical, hips are more pushed backwards, you could say he kind of quote unquote looks taller. He's not bent down as far. That's a hinge or a deadlift. So there's a big difference between a deadlift and a squat, or a hinge and a knee dominant movement. And the hinge or the deadlift is very hip dominant, so it works a lot of the back side of the body, so the glutes, the hamstrings. Whereas the squat is going to work a little bit more so in the front side we call it the chain, where more of the quads, kind of the front part of the legs. So it's important that you're definitely doing both of those in some form, way, shape, or form in terms of variations. The next 2 are going to be pushing and pulling. So that's, bench press or pushing and then pulling. That's pretty self-explanatory, like a pull-up or a bent over row. And then you obviously are going to have single leg and single arm variations of those. So that's going to be where we look at a little bit, working more kind of functional strength. That's where I think a lot of kind of the golf fitness stuff has landed in it. You see a lot on social, people standing on one leg and pulling with one arm. And, if we can, they try to make the balance incredibly difficult. And the message is that's what you need to do. Those are supplemental exercises. The core exercises that are really going to move the needle for you in terms of club head speed are much more so generally in the squat, the hinge, the push, the pull, the big kind of compound strength movements. Single leg, single arm have a place, but they are in the supplemental realm, not in the primary realm. And then you have your kind of your core exercises. And that's where you get into anti-extension and anti-rotation. So anti-extension, if you look at the picture, the two boys in the blue shirts, you can see the one good posture is what it's termed, how he's kind of in a neutral position. If we look at the one in the anterior pelvic tilt, that's where he's arched his back. That's called lumbar extension. So anti-extension exercises, if you think of a plank, if you think of army crawls, think of anything where you're kind of on all fours, shoulder taps around the world, where we kind of get on you, kind of keeping your pelvis neutral. We're trying to get you to be like the good posture picture there. So we're basically, those exercises are designed to challenge you to not go into lumbar extension. Because if you do that in your golf swing, it's a big power leak if we're talking speed, which we are today, obviously. But it's also a potential for an injury risk as well in terms of low back issues, glute, hip injuries, those sorts of things. So, the stronger you can get at fighting extension, that's going to help with your power transfer up. And then the final one is anti-rotational exercises. So you'll see those like the Pallof presses. If you're going to the plank and kind of pulling under one arm with the cable, basically we're trying to fight rotation, anti-rotational landmines side to side. So that's where if we look at the image, the guy swinging the golf club, he's got his torso's turned a lot and his hips. His torso's turned way more than his hips, so there's separation. So anti-rotation, what that means is can you move your lower body without your upper body moving? Basically, if we remember that test from the mobility element, the dissociation test, can you move lower body without upper body moving or vice versa? So the anti-rotational exercises, that's what they're aimed at. It's actually where we actually try to get you to not move your torso, which is kind of counterintuitive when we think about core exercises. I should be doing sit-ups, or I should be kind of moving that area. The role of your core in the golf swing is actually to fight movement into extension, to fight movement into rotation, and actually transfer energy up the chain and out through the club. So that being said, if those are the core elements, how you do, so that's kind of the what should you be doing. How you do it, definitely it matters based on a lot of the research that we've seen. So how many reps, sets you do. So off season, you're going to tend to do higher levels of reps. So maybe 6 to 8 reps, maybe even 10 reps in a set. In your sets, you're probably doing 3 to 4 sets. As we get more in season or closer to where we want you to be extremely powerful, you'll actually see less reps. So that's where, like, coming out of in season, like over the summer, really only doing, maybe 4 to 6 reps max. Not doing a ton of the, of the 8 rep exercises, particularly like those compound exercises, so squats, deadlifts. You may do 8 reps on a supplemental, like a single arm press or something along those lines. But in terms of your big core strength focused exercises, we're not doing tons and tons of reps. Tempo is going to definitely impact, obviously load. The fewer reps you do, the more load we're going to do. And then we're going to talk triphasic versus traditional here in a second. So triphasic, so wherever you are, kind of in your head, or make a note on paper in front of you. There's triphasic training and there's traditional training. So traditional training is what we tried for an entire year back in 2016. And that's basically where you just start with low weight, high reps. And then as we progress through the year, we decrease the reps and increase the weight. Triphasic training is more what a lot of you have experienced at this point. And that's where we look at, we'll do 4 to 6 weeks of a slow lowering. So if we use squat as the example, like a 5 to 7 second lowering of squat. And then we go into the next 4 to 6 weeks, we would do the isometric, which is where we pause at the bottom for 4 to 5 seconds. And then we'd go into the explosion where we don't necessarily, we kind of go down at a normal pace and just really work on the explosion up. So working on the different phases of movement that there are. So what we actually found when we did that in 2017, we found that there was actually a big difference depending on age group in terms of who it was most helpful for. So the triphasic actually is the most helpful for adults in terms of swing speed gains, and traditional training we found was actually the most helpful for for juniors, and that makes a heck of a lot of sense. So these are basically the numbers of it. So for the adults, traditional training. So what we saw, if we look at all of our data overall, the average adult golfer in a 12-week span will gain 1 mile an hour of training. If they did traditional training, but then what we did is we broke apart traditional training. We said, okay, what happened during just this year? And the average adult actually underperformed that 1 mile an hour by 10%. And then we took that same group. We said, okay, well, what happened during the year of triphasic training? And they actually outperformed by 50% that. So think of, if 1 mile an hour is the average, traditional training was like 0.9 miles an hour in 12 weeks, and triphasic training was 1.5 miles an hour. So that's a 60% gap. That's absolutely huge. And then juniors, they'll gain on average about 3 miles an hour. You see similar but opposite flip of that, where traditional training outperformed similar, kind of like that 50 to about a 50% difference. So traditional training was way more beneficial for the juniors, and triphasic actually was not as beneficial. Reason being, juniors are less developed. They don't have as much of a strength basis. And so just kind of building through volume a level of strength. Once we have a good level of strength, a good level of strength, then the triphasic actually becomes very helpful. So that was an extremely interesting takeaway that we found with that. Some other interesting takeaways we had through that research was that the heavier juniors are, that means they're generally going to swing faster. But when you get older, the heavier you are, the slower you're going to swing. So I think that's just typically the type of weight we're carrying when we get older is not necessarily good weight. When we're getting, as we're younger, that's probably more muscular weight. We did see that the better the anti-rotational strength is, that more swing speeds. So think of that Kaiser test that we do, the anti-rotational Kaiser test you all do during test week. And then the vertical relationship fluctuates. So, and this is looking at just raw, how high did they jump? We're actually starting to look more relative numbers, getting more into that ground force, and those numbers are way higher. So, but basically, it was very interesting. The younger kids it was not a very strong relationship. As we got into the older, kind of the elite college and professional players, the relationship actually was a lot higher. And then we're going to actually get into, a little later, we'll talk about the overspeed training and also the eccentric flywheel training. But that was the basic takeaways from the research on the actual strength component of the research. This is just a quick graph here, or table here, that shows you the difference in the weight. So correlation of 1.0 is a perfect relationship. Anything over 0.5 is good. Anything around 0.7 or higher is really good. Obviously, you can see the negative relationships to clubhead speed in the adults. So that was kind of just an interesting takeaway. So these are earlier correlations. These have changed a little bit, but generally still in terms of this order, in terms of vertical, seated chest pass, and then shot put being the stronger relation. We call them the big three in terms of related to clubhead speeds. That's why we have you guys do all of those tests. And you can see that the Kaiser test is an anti-rotational core strength test, so it's not surprising that doesn't have as high of a correlation to clubhead speed, but it actually has a very high correlation to shot put, which was very interesting. So, all right, so that covers, so if we're in this fourth quadrant, just to quickly review, the first three we talked about were mobility, equipment, and technical, right? And then in the fourth quadrant, the first element that we talked about was just strength. So how much force somebody can produce. Now that plus what we're going to talk about now, which is speed, is what eventually equates to power or clubhead speed. So let's get into this, because this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. I think the biggest confusion in strength world is where everybody wants to do one-armed exercises, standing on one leg with just bands and not a lot of weight. And the research is very clear that if you can get stronger, you're going to put more force into the ground, so the club is going to go faster. So the single arm, lightweight, high rep stuff, supplemental, I'll leave it at that. Getting into the speed stuff. So this is the next study we did on eccentric flywheel training. So if you guys here, you've seen the K pulley, which is on the right there. and then you've seen the K box, which is on the left. So what we saw with these is that actually in a 6-week study that the K box increased club head speed by 1.3 miles an hour. The K pulley increased speed by 2.5 miles, over 2.5 miles an hour. So if we think back to the average in a 12 weeks period for adults is 1 mile an hour. K box was kind of right around there. In a 6-week period, the K pulley doubled that, more than doubled that. So what that basically suggests, or what we can interpret from that, is that strength training and that eccentric side of things, which we saw was important when adults in the triphasic training, eccentric training, or basically the flywheel, when you pull out really hard and then it kind of pulls you back and it's really hard to change the direction. That type of training in the rotational plane of motion is incredibly helpful and incredibly important for golfers to be doing. So that's going to incredibly help. And I could have put this in the strength side of things, but the speed element, it just had such a huge impact in that in such a short amount of time. I thought that was important to put there. So truly in the speed element, there's kind of four realms. There's plyometrics, there's medicine balls, Olympic variations, and nervous system training. Nervous system training is a really exciting one that everyone's talking about. We're going to get that saved the best for last there. Plyometrics, we don't do a ton of these with our adults. I actually talked with one of our members last night about this. The risk reward, there's other ways that we can get speed gains in adults without having to subject you to kind of the impact, dropping down off a box and jumping up. So just risk reward, we just don't feel like is there. But with our younger juniors and our professional athletes, we definitely will use plyometrics. So jumping off boxes, jumping over hurdles, and other variations of there to work on how well they can absorb force, hold it, and then explode it out. Medicine ball training, everybody, that's the big thing in golf, right? Throw the ball on the wall. I think the key with a lot of these medicine ball drills is, number one, the load of the medicine ball is never enough to provide enough physiological input where you're actually going to get stronger. What it can do with a light ball is you can actually work on the speed at which you're doing it, and the sequencing is absolutely huge. So I've combed through all of the research on medicine balls. Nobody really knows how they work or why they work. We just know that they do work. And so kind of our hypothesis is it's more of a sequencing element. I think that's where it comes into the importance when you're in class. We talk about drive off the inside of that trail foot. We work on a lot of the kinetic sequencing in terms of how you're driving off that trail leg, clearing that lead hip, and then driving vertically up off that lead leg, similar to this way that you do it in your golf swing. So there's lots of different variations of medicine balls. I think the key here is don't ever want to go incredibly heavy for what we're trying to do in golf. Keep it a bit lighter. Think, with any of the throws, probably 4 to 6 pounds. With any of the slams, you're probably going 10, maybe 15 at most. So really wanting to make sure we move the ball quickly with intent. Olympic variations. So this is something we'll do with a lot of our juniors. Again, particularly overhead stuff. Not the risk reward just isn't really there for adults. But with our kids, in terms of learning how to drive up from the ground and then explode out through the hand, these are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly helpful. There's a lot of research, particularly with the heavier barbell Olympic variations, with the pulls and whatnot, that you can actually create incredible amounts of ground force reaction, which is what we need to create in the golf swing. So these jumping, all of that is all aimed at improving and increasing how much ground force you can create, because that ultimately creates how fast you can swing the golf club. So Olympic variations and jumping, depending on the individual, the risk reward may not be there. If it is something that's going to be valuable, the reason is because it's going to greatly improve the ground reaction forces. So let's get into the nervous system stuff. Again, if you guys have any questions, this is a lot of content information just posted in the chat box. This is a governor, and so your brain basically has a governor on it. So if you don't ever train fast, it's going to start to keep you slow. But ultimately, most people, when they walk in untrained, can move 10 to 15% faster than they're moving right now, or touch their toe. Mobility can go 10 to 15% more. So you can move a lot more than your brain's allowing you, and that's just a protective response. And that's where kind of the nervous system magic comes in. Okay, so the challenge or the question that I think I really want to drive home today, if nothing else, take this home, is that if you're going to use any of these nervous system strategies or magic out there, basically it's very, very critically important that we know when to use it and when not to use it. So there's 3 categories of golfers that we've kind of found over the 1,000+ data points that we've got, and 1,000+ golfers we've got the database of. Now, there's one is going to be the ticking time bomb. So this is somebody, when you come in, you look at your clubhead speed, and let's say your percentile is 90th percentile for your age. So you're way up here. And then we do all your power testing, and your power testing is 25th percentile. And we look at your mobility, and you fail a few of those too. So you're swinging way faster relative to where you physically live. That's somebody you are at a high risk for injury. And if we give you overspeed training or some of these other systems that are out there, we're going to hurt you. You're already going way faster than your body can control. There's no reason to get you to swing faster until you can control it. Otherwise, we're really going to jeopardize your longevity in the game. Excuse me. So if that is you, just everything else that's going to follow, you do not do that until we get you to potentially category 2, which is the balanced golfer, which is, let's say you swing in the 60th percentile and all your power numbers are in the 50th, 60th percentile, you're pretty balanced. That's depending on the individual. That may be where we then use what we'll talk about next. And then there's the third category, which is I call the more RPM under the hood, which means your power numbers are 75, 80, 90th percentile, and your clubhead speed is like 25, 30th percentile. So you can produce way much more power athletically than you're doing in your golf swing. There's a huge gap here, and this usually is nervous system based. Particularly, obviously the assumption is that your mobility is clear before we're jumping into any of this. So before we jump into any of what we're going to talk about next, you want to have all 4 of your rotary centers pretty much cleared in terms of you can rotate in all those directions, and you want to be at a point where you actually are producing more power athletically then remember power, which is like those medicine ball tests, then your clubhead speed is at relatively. If you are the flip of that, I call you a ticking time bomb, because that's what you're probably going to run into some problems. So super speed golf, Mach 3 speed training, these are just 2 of the starting to become more popular systems that are out there. They both work, but I think the key is the but. And that's where we'll talk a little bit about our research that we've done on the overspeed type training. I think we always want to think about, we don't want to be the top A to B where we're doing a lot of extra drawing, using a lot of extra ink to get to point B. We want to get in a straight line. How quickly can we get from A to B? And I think that's the important piece to ask. So the first requirement, just to review, because this is incredibly important, you have to have all of your mobility checked off, or at least pretty much there. And then your power numbers, being above your clubhead speed percentiles. Assuming you've done that. The research takeaway, so we've done 2 studies at this point. Some of you watch this may have helped us figure this stuff out. But basically the first study was a 6-week study. The second study was an 8-week study. And in both studies, there statistically was no difference between the high volume protocols. So basically the 10 swings, ends up being close to 100 swings 2 times a week with 3 different weighted clubs, compared to just using the one club about 6 to 10% lighter than the standard driver, 30 times. So 66% less swings statistically came up with the same results as if you did a lot of swings. So that was one of the big takeaways, is in no other sport would anybody recommend that incredible high volume of maximal speed work. So that was kind of our hypothesis. It ended up being true. It was kind of helpful. Made me feel better about sports science and everything what everyone else is doing. And we should probably, the body doesn't function differently just because you're a golfer. Physiologically, it's going to be the same. If you're a sprinter, if you play handball or cricket, baseball, or golf. The other issue that we saw with the 3 clubs is that there are definitely some kinematic concerns with the extremely light club or the extremely heavy club. The 2 light club, you ended up starting to see a lot of arms driving. So with your driver, we actually saw lower body driving it, and then kind of a good kinematic sequence of torso, then arms, then hands. That was lost with the lighter club. And with the heavier club, we actually saw an increase in X factor, which for some people may be good. So in some cases, it may be an appropriate thing to use. In some cases, like I have right now, a higher level junior golfer, he's got like 65 degrees of X factor, and he's got back issues, which isn't a surprise. So he's got way too much elasticity. He's not able to control it. So using a heavy implement with him would actually not be something I'd want to do. The other thing in the first study that we saw was because we had just a light, one group who only did the light clubs, one group who only did the heavy clubs. The heavy and only the light actually both got slower. So it is important. You can go too light and you can go too heavy. So just important to understand that. In terms of the Mach 3 systems, this is the other big one that's out there. I've talked with the founder about it, and obviously read a lot on their website. We haven't actually tested this, so this is all non-research based from our side of things. But the general claim on their website is that over the course of a year, the average golfer is going to gain about 11 miles an hour. And they say that about the first 4 to 7 miles an hour comes from the idea of kind of maximizing speed, what they call out in front. So that's not a physiological change. That's what they'd say. You get that in the first session, and even if you stop doing the system, they say that you'll maintain that. So we haven't tested that, so I'm just telling you what their site says. And from talking with Mike, that's what what he says. So then you figure if you do the math, so basically half of that 11 miles an hour in a year is what occurs, and then their average would be then another 4 to 7 miles an hour, which is within the realm of what we've seen in our research too. So I'm not surprised, particularly if you add in, like if you did the average for an adult, no matter what training they did was about a mile an hour, you throw in overspeed, where we see, saw an average like 2 to 3 miles an hour over a 12-week period, times 4, there's your, 11 to 12 miles an hour for the year. So, anyway, so that's what they say. I guess the big thing that I would say, looking at, I've had some people ask me about this system, just look at the volume of it. I think that's the big thing that I'm always concerned about with people, is looking at volume. So if you're doing a lot of volume, as we saw with the overspeed training, you actually can get a lot same results with a lot less. So the results appear to be, doing kind of a combined strength and conditioning program and then a overspeed program with the low volume appears to be pretty similar in terms of the results that you'd see with, for instance, with a Mach 3 system. I'm sure there'll be other systems that come out just because people will pay money for it. So hopefully that helps to clear up a little bit of that. But all of these systems fall under the nervous system area. So just to wrap up before we get to Q&A here. So this is, I just put in here, this is an example of a speed training circuit that we've utilized here. And you can do this on your own. So we use so we'll do basically 20 seconds of work on, 90 seconds off. So the reason for that is the glycolytic system, which is the extremely powerful system that we use in the golf swing, that fatigues pretty quickly. Technically it's really 10 seconds or less. If you're doing your swings, you got 5 swings in 20 seconds, that's pretty good. But basically we're trying to go kind of explosive, and then we want to give that system a true ability to recover, which at minimum needs to be kind of like a 5-to-1 rest to work ratio. So 90 seconds is just a little cleaner than 100 seconds, but technically it should be, if you did 15 to 90, I guess that'd be better. But so speed sticks, we would recommend using your specific. So if you're a woman, use the green. If you're a boy, use the blue. Relative to how heavy your driver is. If you just wanted to make your own, just make sure it's somewhere between that 6 to 10% lighter than your driver. And then, so that's going to be the specific speed of actually swinging. And then you would have squared scoop toss. Basically, you want something that's going to work torsionally. So that's rotationally. That's the, one of the main 3 kinetic forces that you'd then work. Then the third element is the lateral speed skater. So that's going to drive the lateral or the horizontal kinetic force that's training that force. And then you look at the overhead slams, an example of one that's going to be more vertically oriented. So within the speed circuit, you're going to train maximal output in vertical, horizontal, and torsional, which are the big 3 ground reaction forces that you want to train to swing faster. And then there's a specific element of actually swinging. And in doing that, like when we've done our speed classes, so if you guys have ever come to those, you can see 5 to 10 mile an hour gains like in that class. Now they're not going to stick because they're nervous system based. You have to continue it, and then generally 4 to 8 weeks that they tend to kind of, that becomes kind of your new norm. So That's an example of how you can use a speed training circuit within your training. But again, it all comes from the intelligence side of looking at, we want to make sure that the exercises that we select are driving towards this ground reaction forces that we want to drive. So kind of the key takeaways from everything here today: mobility is prerequisite. If you don't have those four elements of rotational mobility, like don't go any further. Do that first. You can work on strength training. You can do that sort of thing in the gym, but you need to really get the mobility stuff cleared up before you even start thinking about the nervous system stuff. With the speed training, whatever system you're using, use it intelligently. And I think the big thing, we need to make sure that you are not in the ticking time bomb category. Balanced golfer, it may be helpful, it may not. It may just be a lot of extra load and not really be that much helpful, in which case you're more putting yourself at more chance for injury. But if you are in that more RPM under the hood category, then we definitely want to go after and use that, because that's going to be a huge asset to you. Strength and conditioning, depending on age, traditional versus triphasic, that's something to consider in terms of what type of training you're doing in the strength side. So remember, the nervous system is the speed side of the power equation. Strength and conditioning is the strength or force side of that. And then you have your anti-rotational core training, definitely critical, because that definitely impacts your shot put, which is very highly correlated to clubhead speed. Body weight does matter. The more you weigh, the more potential force you have the ability to create. But a big beer belly is not necessarily helping your clubhead speed. And then I think the big thing also is that improvement takes time. I think it's very easy to get caught up in gaining 10 miles an hour really quickly. What we're looking at is long-term. We use the term long-term athletic development, and that doesn't just apply to children or juniors. That applies to seniors too. Looking at, you're 60 right now. What's your long-term plan for the next 10, 20 years to maintain your speeds up as high as you can? And that's where I think we have a number of members that are in their 70s and swinging faster than they ever have. They gain every year, and that's through the test, retest, see where we're at, which category are you in, make sure we keep you healthy and keep you moving forward. I think those are just kind of important takeaways. There is that it's a multifaceted system. Sometimes speed work is going to be where your biggest gains are. Sometimes it's going to be strength work in the gym. Other times you may need different equipment. Other times it may be a technical element that needs to be addressed. There's not one simple answer, but there is that with the research we've done, we do have the ability to kind of figure out where you need to go. So hopefully that was helpful and kind of clarified a lot of the actual science that's out there. So let me know if you guys have questions here. You can go ahead. You guys should have a little chat box there that you can put questions in. If you don't have a question now, but you do think of one later, I'm going to put my email in the chat box, chris@powersuccess.com. Most of you guys probably already have it, but send me an email. Happy to chat with you offline about any questions you have specifically to you. But I think the big thing I just wanted you guys to take away from this is that does exist an ability to assess which quadrant you're going to get your biggest return from. And I think once you know that, you can really be very laser focused and very efficient on achieving what your goal is from a speed perspective. And I think ultimately also knowing what percentile you're in for your age group, that also helps to give you perspective. If you think you swing you're totally happy with how you swing, but then you look at your percentile and you're in the 30th percentile, well, you obviously have a big potential high ceiling that you can aspire to. If I had a case of a junior girl, she's wants to swing faster. When you actually look at her numbers for 15 years old, she's already in the 97th percentile for professionals. So she doesn't, the chances of her going a ton higher in terms of speed and the impact that that's going to have on her ability to score and play at the next level probably isn't that high. So it's for her, it's more so getting her as strong as possible so she can maintain that speed with as little minimal effort. So that increases our longevity. But more of her worker time may need to be spent on technical or and those sorts of elements to help her scoring to continue to improve. So that's where I think understanding where you are right now and then those assessments is incredibly important. But, all right. So if you guys do have any questions that you think of after this, definitely shoot me a note. Emails there, chris@powersuccess.com. Otherwise, I will see you guys next month. See, I'm trying to get Alex to do. She's got a good. She's doing our continuing education for our staff next month on a lot of the strength training. So maybe me and maybe Alex, we'll see. But we'll have a good topic for you next month. Definitely feel free to share this with any friends that you have that are maybe have questions on this. And excited to see you guys when you're in next week. Otherwise, have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you guys soon.